Hey everyone, Hobbyist here. So, I'm going to be getting into a video which I think I should have revised a long time ago. So about 5 months back on this channel, I recorded the base game tutorial video, but after watching it a few times, I kind of realized that I didn't really cover everything. And that's just kind of a bad mistake on my part. So, with this video, I'm really going to dive into everything when it comes to just the base game for any new players out there. This is going to be the new video that hits the playlist, and I'm hoping that this will be a lot more helpful than that old video. So if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and to make sure to comment down below. And let me know how helpful this video was to you, because I want to enable you guys to be able to play this game to its entirety and to find its full enjoyment before you get introduced to all the crazy and complex expansions. So let's go ahead and get started. Explain everything Talisman related. I've first got to tell you what is the main objective. Well, inside of the base game of Talisman, there is a space in the very middle of the board that is known as the Crown of Command. Your entire goal is that from the outer region, which I'll explain in greater detail, is to make your way around the board and eventually make your way all the way to the middle, in which you will cast the command spell in order to be the last player standing and in order to win the game. It's a very simple objective, but it's the means and the way that this game can change that can make this adventure a lot more difficult, and it is honestly the reason why I enjoy this game as much as I do. So the first thing that I'm going to go over is that inside of the base game of Talisman, there are 14 characters in total that you can start off with and to be your representative in this adventure. So these 4 cards right here are just a couple of examples of some of the characters that you can pick from. However, the character that I'm going to primarily be focusing on and kind of using as my model is the wizard here. Now, in future videos down the line, and I'll leave a couple of them up top, I go over the individual pieces as far as how the characters work and how they strategize. But just for the sakes of this video, I'm not going to go that in depth. So, for any character card, regardless of which expansion that you're playing with, they're always going to have stats. So, to this left here is Strength, and Strength is a component inside of Talisman which it determines your ability to fight in battles and is an important stat for various different areas inside of Talisman. Craft represents a different kind of battle, but it more so is a representation of your knowledge, and it is also a determining factor in your spell count and how many spells that you can carry and all that sort of thing. Every character at the bottom here is going to have a starting location, which is the reason, if we look over here to the right, why we have the wizard inside of the graveyard, because every character is going to have a starting location. Sometimes, depending on the character, they may or may not have a strategic advantage when it comes to where they're positioned on the board. But as far as just base Talisman goes and just the 14 characters, none of them really have any initial benefits from starting in the various locations. But moving forward, as far as the currency of Talisman goes, every character starts with 1 piece of gold, and gold has a multitude of uses inside of Talisman. If we look over here to the right, we can see that village space, and each and every object, depending on what it says on the space, and various cards, are going to give you access to this purchase deck. So this purchase deck, just giving you guys a glimpse, has a various assortment of objects and followers and other benefits that are going to help you progress on your journey inside of Talisman. So the last couple of things that we want to look at when it comes to just surveying the character cards is that at the very top right here, we can see that that is fate. So fate is an indicator of luck, and it's the number of chances to where you can do a whole bunch of sort of things. So these are fate tokens. So even though these are double-sided, in this particular game, it doesn't serve any function. However, I'll explain in greater detail further along down the video the greater importance of fate and why you want to keep that up and the multitude of benefits and uses that it has inside of any particular game of Talisman. So whenever it comes to actually setting up the game, the actual setup for just base game Talisman is super easy. Throughout your turns and the ways that you move around the board, you have this pile of cards, which is known as the adventure deck. On the various spaces that you're going to be landing on the outer region or the middle region, which I'll explain what these regions mean, you're going to be drawing from these particular cards, and they'll be able to provide a variety of different things. Altogether, regardless of how complex or how easy you want to make your gaming experience be, there is only ever going to be 6 different kinds of adventure cards that you're going to be drawing. First of which is enemies. So enemies are going to be things that you're going to be fighting at various points in the game, and they all have their own benefits when it comes to boosting your ability to grow your stats, because that's the very important thing when it comes to being able to progress and try to make your way towards the center of the Crown of Command. The next thing is objects. So objects are going to have a multitude of powers and abilities that you otherwise wouldn't normally have. And they're going to be the things that you want to start collecting in order to provide a various assortment of benefits. The next thing that we have is followers. So followers are a type of adventure cards where they'll be joining your party and they'll also be helping you with various things. But unlike objects, there's not really a limit of how many of these guys that you can recruit. You can have up to like 20 to 30 followers, however many followers you can find, you can bring them all in, and then they can all compound and stack all of their abilities, and it's a really useful way to progress in this game. So the next type of adventure card that we have is that we have strangers. Now, strangers only provide initial boost when you find them. Sometimes they're going to have requirements and what it's going to take to be able to interact with them, but otherwise they provide a bunch of really good stuff for you. The next kind of adventure cards that we have is that we have places. Places are far more permanent in comparison to any of the other adventure cards, because more times than not, whenever they're drawn onto a space, they're going to be more permanent. So sometimes those places that you draw might sit on that space for the rest of the game. So that is something else that is an option when it comes to pulling from the various assortment of adventure cards. And then the last type of adventure card, the most important of the 6 types, are these events here. So events inside of Talisman are always going to classify into 2 different areas. It's always either going to be region-based, or it's going to infect the entire game and every player that is involved. So let me now go ahead and show you what these regions that I keep talking about. Inside of Talisman, when it comes to regions, there are only 3 regions inside of just this main game. Where the wizard is currently, right there on that graveyard space, and circling all the way around that outer strip, is known as the outer region. If we go a bit further and we see this giant door towards our right, and we circle all the way around to this cave up top and to this temple far over there, that is known as the middle region. And then where the Crown of Command is, where our objective is, and everything surrounding that, is the inner region. So when it comes to the events that are region-based, if, let's say, that this region event, of course that's not what it actually says, but let's say that it was any characters in this area are going to lose their next turn. So if it was drawn where the wizard was, then it only affects everybody in the outer region, and no one in the middle or inner region is affected. If it was drawn in the middle region, no one in the inner region or the outer region is affected. And if anything were to happen inside of the inner region, then nothing in the middle or the outer region would be affected. And then, of course, as you complicate your game, as you add more expansions and stuff, there's going to be other regions that if any events are happening in those areas, they're not going to affect anywhere on this entire board. But you don't have to worry about that. That's for future down the road when you decide that you're a bit bored with vanilla Talisman and you want to expand your adventures and customize your own game in that sort of way. I think the most fundamental thing that I need to explain first is how exactly movement works inside of Talisman. So, of course, inside a Talisman, there are dice. However, unlike most dice games, you're only able to roll one die for your movement. So, let's just come up here a little bit. And we roll our one die. There are cards and things that allow you to roll more than one die for movement, but otherwise, you're only going to be rolling the one die. So we roll. You see we got our 4 there. So the way that movement works inside of Talisman is that there is no splitting your movements. It's always going one direction or the other. So if you want to move your 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, that is one option. If you want to go the other way, 1, 2, 3, 4, that also is another option. But here's where this fate that I was mentioning earlier comes into play. Whenever at any time that you aren't happy with your movement, let's say that we didn't want to roll a 4 and we wanted to re-roll, it costs you a fate in order to do so. And whenever fate is used to re-roll, that's it. You don't get to constantly use up your fate and try to re-roll and get something better. You have to accept whatever your second result is after you spend fate. So that's how that works. So let's say we move our 1 space and we end up in this fields area. So that is our first movement. And the way that it works here inside of Talisman when it comes to taking any particular turn, so we started with our movement. So the next question we have to ask ourselves here is there any other characters in the space? So seeing as how there's not, then we encounter the space. So in order to do that, we have to draw our card. Now, this card in particular is an event, but as you can see in this bottom right here, make that nice and better for you guys to see, we can see that that has a number 1. At any time that you might have to draw more than one adventure card, there is going to be a set of encounter numbers that are on each of the individual cards. Coming back to our adventure card types here, you can see that this one's got a 1, this one's got a 6, a 4, a 1, a 5, and a 2. So the way that this works when you are encountering more than one card is that you have to follow those encounter numbers from the smallest to the largest. So any of the ones that show up, you have to encounter those cards first, whether those be events or enemies or whatever kind of adventure cards that you're facing, you have to face the 1s first. Then you go on to the 2s, then you go on to the 3s, then you go on to the 4s, the 5s, 6s, all the way down, depending on how many cards you drew. Each of the individual spaces, primarily in the outer region, or in any other region inside of Talisman, is going to have a card limit on how many cards can be pulled up onto those particular spaces. Most of the spaces inside of the outer region are going to say that you can't have more than one card in that area. So if we drew an enemy, and he was going to sit here, right in our field space, then that means that we cannot keep drawing more cards. We can't draw this card in order to put onto the field space. We have to clear that space, if we are able to, in order to be able to keep drawing from that area. If it's a card, like a place, that might say that it'll be there for the rest of the game, then that's what the card says. It's stuck there for the rest of the game. You can't keep drawing cards in that particular area. So that is something else that you gotta also keep in mind. Seeing as how there's no face-up cards in the area, then we just listen to the encounters, which all the encounters when it comes to the adventure cards are specifically described on each of the individual adventure cards. So you don't have to worry about, well, am I following the rules right in that particular area or anything like that, because all the details are going to be on the card itself. As far as what you do with it, if you keep it, if you get rid of it, all those sort of things. And sometimes, depending on what it might do, sometimes it might cause you to miss turns, or if you're fighting enemies, or it's going to do a huge variety of different things once everything is all taken care of. But let's say that we had an enemy this time on this turn. So that dragon is what we're going to be focusing on. Whenever enemies are drawn, you are more than inclined to fight them first. Generally, you're always going to be fighting enemies, unless the card itself gives you the option to evade, which simply means you don't fight it when you land there. Or there might be certain spells, which I'll get into more later, that are able to permit you, or any objects that are going to permit you to evade certain enemies and all that sort of thing. So how do battles exactly work? So when it comes to battles, which is focused on our strength, whereas strength, while we have our printed value, is always going to be represented by these little cones here. This small cone here represents 1 unit of strength. So whenever it's added to your character card, it's 1 plus whatever is printed on your card. If you have a big cone here, then that represents 5. So that'll be 5 plus whatever's on your card. The reason that this is important is that when you get into a battle, you always are going to start with your strength value, and then however many cones that you have, how many 5 cones, or if you have a 1 cone, is going to be added, and that's going to consist of your strength. So let's say that we had the 5 cone, and our character has a base strength 2. So right now, we're on an even playing field. So we got 7 strength, and it's always going to add any modifiers that are going to change how our roll is going to work. Modifiers are things that include weapons that are going to add strength to us. Sometimes spells are going to add strength to your base stats whenever you're getting into a battle. So whatever those that you want to use, and whatever followers that might add strength too. All of those are considered modifiers that are going to help vary whatever your attack score is going to be. And now here's where it starts to get important. So we've got our base strength plus however many cones, plus however many weapons we're using, how many followers, or how many spells that we're using. We add all that together. So then we roll our die. As we can see here, I just rolled real quick. We got a 3. So right now, with just this first roll, with our 5 plus 2, with our base strength, plus our 3, that is a score, an attack score total of 10. All right? You guys are following me so far? Okay, cool. So then, after we get that attack score, once that attack score is finalized, then our dragon gets to roll. You can have another player do this, or you could do this yourself. So when it comes to enemies, all enemies are going to have their own strength value as well. As we can see here, this dragon's got a strength of 7. So as a base of 7, enemies don't have modifiers, which is really nice. Unless they're otherwise conditioned on the adventure cards themselves, it's always just going to be the value. So it's got a 7 plus its die roll, which as we can see here has got a 5. So 7 plus 5 is 12. So the dragon has an attack score of 12, whereas we only got an attack score of 10. At this point in time, there's 2 options. One, if you have fate, then you can use fate to re-roll your die and hopefully increase your attack score. But whenever you use fate, whatever your new result is, you have to accept. It's very similar to our movement. So fate is used when we're attacking in battles. It's used during our movement. And this kind of battling works for the other end as well. There are going to be plenty of enemies who are going to fight you with craft instead, which is known as psychic combat. So psychic combat works exactly the same as battles do, but instead it's just focused on your craft. So you do your craft value, plus however many cones that you have, plus however many weapons might add to your craft, however many followers, spells, all that sort of thing. All those modifiers are added to those stats. And then you do your dice roll, and then you add all that together, and that is your total attack score for psychic combat. And then those enemies are treated the same way. whatever their craft value is plus their die roll, and that equals their attack score. Because our attack score is less, and again, we can use Fate for psychic combat as much as we can for battles. So, because our attack score is less than the dragons, we lose the battle and we lose a life. So, most base game characters are going to have a life of 4. And much like the cones for strength, which are always the red ones, this short green cone is our life counter and it represents 1 life. If we ever exceed our life limit and we get up to 5, then we just use these big green cones. And it's the same for the craft. So the little blue cone is 1 craft, and if we ever get any forms of 5, we upgrade to the big cones. And it just makes things easier when it comes to figuring out what it is that your stats are in any particular game. So because we lost, we lose one of those life counters, and the turn simply ends. That's it. And of course, there's a multitude of other things that could occur at the same time. However, if we won against this dragon, and we exceeded it, we beat it, then we keep it as a trophy right here on our character card. And these trophies are important for stat development. So when it comes to taking those, if there were any modifiers that were able to weaken it, because there are spells that can do that, then the trophy value is only whatever its strength is. And the reason that this is important for stat development is because any multiples of 7, whether it be for craft or strength-based enemies, is able to grant you 1 additional craft or strength that adds to your stats. So just keep that in mind. It's any multiple of 7. If you get trophies up to 7, you get 1 strength or craft. For 14, it's 2, so on and so forth. You guys can do the math from there. Now, moving on from battles and psychic combat, we also have the spells, which look like this. So spells, whenever or if you are able to gain them, are always going to tell you exactly how they work on their card, when you can cast them, and what exactly they do. However, unlike most of any other cards, you want to keep these face down and only to yourself. Don't let anybody else see what your spells are. The only exceptions to this rule is that there are characters like the Prophetess who have the ability to look at spells. And generally, character abilities have some areas when it comes to trumping specific mechanics, but I have videos on those that explain those in greater detail. So spells are kept to yourself, and going back to craft and how that relates with our spells, if you have a base craft of 3 or 4, you can carry 1 spell. If you have 5, then you can carry 2 spells at a time. If you have 6 or more craft, then you can carry 3 spells at a time. So that is something else to keep in mind. When it comes to the objects that you are going to be collecting at any various points of your Talisman adventures, you can only carry 4 objects at a time. So inside of a play area, so we have our card here, and we can see down here at the bottom it's got this objects tab, and at the bottom right it's got a followers tab. That's where you can line up your stuff to kind of keep that in mind as far as like how many objects you have, what they are, how many followers you have, any extensions, and all that sort of thing. Because while you are only by default granted to carry 4 objects at a time, there are objects and there are followers, such as this mule here, that can extend your carrying limit to where you can carry more than 4 objects at a time. If for whatever reason you exceed your carrying limit, let's say you get 5 or 6 objects, then you have to ditch objects until you get down to your carrying limit. So let's say we got a lot of good objects in a very short period of time, but then we get our 5th object and we're like, oh no, we can't carry anymore. Well, maybe at the time, this armor might not be good for us because we got objects that compensate for what this armor can do. At that point, then you have to ditch it on your current space that you're on, But just remember this. Any cards that you ditch onto a particular space can be taken by other players if they land there. So that is something to keep in mind. So you just got to be careful with which cards you get rid of and which ones that you keep. So now that we have covered objects and how they work, how battles and psychic combat work when it comes to fighting enemies, and just as a side note, you can, if you land on another player, attack other players as well. And the battles in psychic combat work the same way as it does with enemies. So just to make that super easy, we've talked about how gold works and we talked about how fate works. But now, how exactly do we get from the outer region to the inner region? What are the ways that we can do that? When it comes to traversing the regions, being able to get in, there are 3 different ways that you can go about getting from the outer region to the middle region. First way in which we could do this is that if we come over here to this tavern space and you happen to roll a 6, then you are able to use the boatman and ferry straight across from the tavern to the temple. Easy enough. That's a way that you can get into the middle region. The other way that you can get into the middle region is that if you are able to get the axe from the purchase deck and you visit any of the wood spaces that are in the outer region, or if you visit the forest space, then you can use the axe to build a raft and then use the raft to cross across the river straight into the middle region. The final way that you can get from the outer region to the middle region is if you come over onto this far side, right down there, to the sentinel space, and fight the sentinel who has a strength of 9 and beat him, then you can safely cross that bridge in order to get from the sentinel space to the hill space inside of the middle region. When it comes to exiting the middle region, you can exit through the sentinel. You don't have to fight the sentinel a second time in order to leave the middle region. It's only just to fight him in order to get in. So that's the ways that you can traverse from there. But now let's kind of come over here a little bit. We're going to come over here to the middle region. Let's say that we used it and we got into the middle region. So when it comes to operating inside of the middle region, it's very much so the same as the outer region. But it's got some nifty spaces that you can choose to go up to, that sort of thing. But the other important thing and the whole entire reason that this game is called Talisman is that you cannot reach the Crown of Command unless you have one. And there are only 2 ways that you can get talismans. First way being that inside the adventure deck, at times you might find a talisman in which it makes it easy for you. So that way you just try to traverse from the middle region to the inner region. The other way to get a talisman is if you come over here to the Warlock's Cave space and you roll your die, then you are permitted then with a quest that you have to complete. While this quest is active, you cannot enter the portal of power that's on the opposite side, which is the only way to get from the middle region to the inner region. So keep that in mind. If you got a quest going, you can't get in. As soon as you complete your quest, regardless of where you are, let's say we left, we did everything we needed to, we completed our quest. You have to come back to the Warlock's Cave, complete your quest, which in turn, you then get a talisman from the talisman deck, which of course you can just pick one out. And that's the other way that you get a talisman. So, when it comes to traversing the middle region, let's say you did everything that you needed to from the middle region, you resolved the portal of power space, and now you are inside the inner region. You are no longer able to roll a die. You can only move one space at a time, and you have to be able to choose which area benefits you better. If you come towards the crypt, then that is generally used for strength-based characters who specialize in strength. And this is going to be the path that you want to go. With the wizard in particular, since he's more of a craft specialist, you're going to want to come across to the mines direction and come all the way around. You can make it either way, going in either direction to the Valley of Fire. But like I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a talisman, you can't get into the Crown of Command. However, at times, there is another mechanic to where, from spells or other circumstances, that you might be turned into a toad. The reason that you don't want to be turned into a toad is because you will lose all of your objects, all of your gold, and all of your followers from being turned into it. Plus, okay, so we got our character card. I'll lay that down. If we get turned into a toad, there's this brand new toad card that goes on top of it. The other thing that happens is that our figure comes off the board, and we get a new toad piece that we use to represent us. All the stats and stuff that you have are now replaced by what's on the toad card, and you are limited to only one space at a time in either direction for 3 total rounds. And rounds are simply dictated through you plus however many players until it comes back to you. That will encompass 1 round. So yeah, so you do not want to become a toad. And then of course, once your 3 turns end, your toad card comes away, your toad figure comes off, your regular piece comes back onto the board. However, any of the gold, followers, and objects that you had that you lost when you turned into a toad, you can't get those back unless you land on that space again, which then you can pick all that stuff back up again and operate as normal. So now, after explaining the toading process, the other thing that I need to explain to you guys is that every single character in Talisman, regardless of which expansion, or if you're just brand new to this and you're only focusing on this base game here, each character is going to have an alignment of some choice. There is neutral alignments, and there are also good and evil alignments. So, as we can see here, the wizard is evil, and the reason that these alignments are important inside of this game is that there are going to be a loads of events, objects, and places that are going to benefit good, evil, and neutral characters. On this far side here, there is the graveyard where the wizard started, to where if you are an evil character, you can replenish your fate for free, which is really nice. Gives you more chances to reroll, more chances to reroll on battles or psychic combats, whether that be with enemies or other players. And more importantly, for any spaces that require you to roll, you can then use fate there as well. So fate is a very useful currency to have. If you are good inside the graveyard, then you lose a life. If you're at the chapel and you are a good character, then you can heal all your lives back for free. But if you are evil, then you lose a life if you go to the chapel. And there's these alignment cards. In other expansions, there's ones for neutral as well. But this is the good side. And this is evil. So at any time that certain events or things might change your alignment, you use that card in order to indicate what alignment you're currently at. So if we were a evil wizard and we got turned good, then we just lay that card face up like that. And that's just our reminder that our wizard isn't evil, but that he's a good character instead. So the last thing that I've got to explain to you simply, and we'll have finally covered everything inside of Talisman itself, is how the command spell works. We made our way from the outer region. We used our various means of getting to the middle region. We were able to complete maybe a Warlock's quest or something like that. We got our Talisman, made it through the portal power, and now we made it all the way up to the top of the Crown of Command. So, now let me explain how that works. Now that we are at the Crown of Command, this is simply how the command spell works. If you are playing with 4 or fewer characters, then you have to roll a die, in which if you roll a 4 or 5 or 6 successfully, then the command spell has been successfully casted. And then every other character that isn't at the Crown of Command space will lose a life. And then you constantly keep doing this as it comes back to your turn, until eventually you start killing off players, and they become the last one standing. Another important thing that I forgot to mention about characters is that if at any time during a game that you die, then you simply just respawn as a different character. However, if someone is at the Crown of Command and they cast a command spell and kill you, then you are permanently dead and eliminated from the game. Just to make that easy on you guys. If there are 5 players, then it increases to a 3, 4, 5, and 6, just kind of to make it fair. If it is 6 players, then it is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with a very slim chance of it not working. And even though the box itself to this game says that it recommends only 2 to 6 players, you can, in theory, play with more than 6 characters at a time. It's just that the game is going to take a lot longer because there's more players to get through. However, in that case, if there are 7 or more players, then the command spell casts automatically whenever you get there. So that way players can start dying off and that the game doesn't take forever. Another important rule, we're just going to use our toad piece just as a representation of another character. If another character reaches the crown of command at the same time, or just immediately follows up, is able to catch up, endure, and make it to the wizard, then that player who made it to the crown of command first can't cast the command spell. He is then forced to fight that other character or any number of other characters that might have meet him at the crown of command at the same time, meaning that the command spell doesn't have to be cast, and those players keep fighting it out until one dies. And then that player that's left standing is then the new leader at the crown of command, and then it's their turn to cast the command spell. But other than that, I believe I've covered everything inside of the base game of Talisman. Hopefully this is a lot more information in comparison to when I did this the first time, as I just simply didn't explain everything. But the other thing that all I've got to say is, if you got any questions as far as Talisman, if there's any specific rules or scenarios that you guys have caught yourself in, let me know down in the comments below. I would love to be able to answer all of those as best as I possibly can, because I consider myself a very knowledgeable person in this game. I've been playing this game for quite a while. But I'm hoping that this video will be a lot more useful to you in comparison to the old one. So, until then, see you guys in the next video.